I never imagined that a single text could shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my love, and the man I was about to marry. Yet there it was, blinking on my phone at 5:30 on a Thursday evening, the exact time Liam and I had planned to cook dinner together and watch that documentary on ancient Rome I'd been obsessing over for weeks. Can't make it tonight. I just need some time to focus on myself. Hope you understand. That's it. No explanation, no apology, no rain check, just those words. I stared at the screen, my heart racing, my mind spinning. Was this exhaustion, a temporary mood, or had the person I trusted most suddenly decided that I was optional? My hands trembled as I set the phone down, realizing, with a sinking feeling, that the man I had planned a life with might not be the person I thought I knew. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake him until he explained, but something inside me held back. I had always been the steady one, the calm, rational, emotionally intelligent Isabella. I prided myself on giving space, on being understanding, on believing in honesty above all else. But now, the rules I lived by seemed cruelly twisted against me. So I did the only thing I could. I gave him space, all the space in the world. I poured a glass of wine, tried to busy myself with grading papers, tried to convince myself that maybe this was just one of those fleeting moments in a relationship. Yet, a pit in my stomach whispered otherwise. My intuition, the one I had learned to trust after years of navigating life and love, screamed that something was wrong. Terribly, unforgivably wrong. That night, lying in the quiet of our shared home, I didn't yet know that my world was about to unravel in ways I couldn't have imagined. I didn't know that the man I loved was hiding not just secrets, but an entire life I hadn't been invited into. And I certainly didn't know that the choice I would make in the coming days would change me forever, reshape my heart, my boundaries, and the way I saw trust, love, and betrayal. By the time I realized the truth, I knew one thing. The Isabella who once thought she understood love would never exist again. I'm Isabella, 31, an ER nurse at Swedish Medical Center here in Seattle. I've always been driven, focused, meticulous, fiercely independent. But I also have a soft spot for people. It's why I became a nurse, I guess. The desire to help, to be needed, to make a difference. I've always believed in giving everything to the people I love, but never at the expense of my own integrity. Liam is 34, a high school history teacher, steady, dependable, the kind of man who shows up when he says he will, pays his bills on time, and believes honesty is sacred. We met 3 years ago at a friend's small dinner party. He was talking animatedly about ancient Rome, gesturing with such passion that I couldn't help but smile. He made history feel alive. And me? I was exhausted, running on 12-hour shifts, trying to keep my life from collapsing under stress. Somehow in that moment, he made me feel safe and seen. We fell in love slowly, deliberately. There were months of late-night conversations over coffee, quiet walks around Green Lake, and shared laughter over silly inside jokes. He introduced me to his family. I met his sister, who immediately liked me, and his parents who, though reserved, welcomed me politely. For a while, it felt perfect. He supported my long hours, my exhaustion, and I tried to give him stability and warmth in return. But even then, there were little signs I didn't fully understand. The first time he canceled plans last minute, I forgave him, thinking he was overwhelmed. Another time, he seemed distracted, scrolling through his phone with a distant look. I didn't confront him. What if I was being overly sensitive? I blamed myself for noticing, for questioning. We got engaged 6 months ago. I thought we were building a future together. Liam moved into my small craftsman house in Green Lake, a cozy home filled with books, plants, and quiet corners, where we could retreat from the world. I thought we were building something solid, a home, a partnership, a life grounded in trust and love. We even joked about how we balanced each other. He grounded me, and I kept him emotionally honest. He often said he admired my resilience, my ability to manage chaos without losing my composure. I admired his consistency, the way he cared without being controlling, the way he made me feel both cherished and free. I trusted him completely, maybe too completely. Maybe that trust was my vulnerability, and perhaps my undoing. But in those early months, nothing seemed amiss. Our lives intertwined seamlessly. We cooked together on Thursdays, binge-watched documentaries on weekends, celebrated little victories, and supported each other through disappointments. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. And that, I realize now, is what made the shock so devastating. When Liam's text arrived that Thursday evening, it wasn't just a cancellation. It wasn't just a night alone. It was the first clear crack in the foundation I thought was unshakable. The man I trusted implicitly had become a stranger, and somehow, all the years of love, laughter, and shared life could not prepare me for the reality of what I was about to discover. Even now, as I look back, I can see the pattern, the small missteps, the unexplained absences, the subtle distancing. But at the time, I didn't notice. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, the same way I always gave myself to those I loved. And yet that trust was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. It started subtly at first, tiny fissures in what I had thought was solid ground. Liam's long hours at school were understandable, but then came the unexpected cancellations. "Sorry, I have to help grade these AP essays tonight," he'd say, or, "I need to meet with a student's parents." Normally, I would have nodded, understanding, but something about the way he delivered these excuses felt different, distant, detached. Then there were the evenings he seemed preoccupied, even when he was physically present. He would sit at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop, smiling at nothing, responding to me with a nod or a distracted laugh. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. After all, it had been a busy week for both of us. But then came the pattern, the space he suddenly needed. A self-care night here, a quiet evening alone, there. He said he needed to recharge, to process his thoughts. I prided myself on being patient, understanding. I believed in emotional intelligence, in giving room for mental health, so I let him have it. Yet each self-care night left me feeling smaller, like I was shrinking into a shadow of my own existence. 3 weeks of this, and I started to notice the little things that didn't add up. The subtle tension in his voice when I asked about his evenings. A flicker of guilt that crossed his face before he smiled. That quick glance at his phone, which he quickly hid when I approached. I began replaying conversations in my head, analyzing every nuance, every word. Was I overreacting, or was my intuition finally screaming what my mind had refused to admit? Family and friends, too, began to influence the situation. Liam's sister called more often, complaining about her own life stress, which he always seemed to prioritize over our plans. His mother sent messages full of subtle admonishments. "I hope you're giving him enough space. Men need their boundaries, Isabella." I tried to take it in stride, but inside, I felt like an outsider in my own relationship. Then there were the stories he told about work. Brief, half-explained anecdotes about colleagues, projects, and professional pressures. At first, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But the inconsistencies began to pile up. "Did you meet with that parent today or yesterday?" I'd ask. "Oh, yesterday or maybe today. I can't remember." Each small contradiction set off a ripple of doubt. At night, I would lie awake in our shared bedroom, listening to his soft breathing, feeling the weight of the growing distance between us. I remembered our early days, the laughter, the shared jokes, the quiet evenings where nothing existed except us. And now it felt like he was slowly retreating into a world I couldn't reach, leaving me standing on the outside looking in. It was in these moments of reflection that the seed of conflict took root. I began noticing the emotional patterns, his avoidance, the secretive glances, the vague explanations. I caught myself wondering, am I imagining this, or is he slowly pulling away? Even as I tried to rationalize, to give him the benefit of the doubt, a gnawing feeling settled in my chest. Something was off, something fundamental. And I knew, deep down, that the distance I was sensing wasn't just temporary. It was the first hint of a storm that was gathering on the horizon, a storm that would soon uproot everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the man I had planned to marry. It was Thursday evening, the night Liam and I had been planning for weeks. Our ritual, cooking dinner together, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the kitchen, followed by a documentary. This week, something about ancient Rome, which I knew would make his eyes light up. I had even prepared a small bottle of red wine, thinking we could sip it while debating Caesar's politics. Then my phone buzzed at 5:30 p.m. The message was short. Can't make it tonight. I just need some time to focus on myself. Hope you understand. I froze, my fingers hovering over the phone. Focus on himself? On himself? But I was right there, waiting for him. We were supposed to be building a life together, planning a wedding for spring, and yet, suddenly, I was optional. My stomach dropped, and my throat tightened. I wanted to text back to ask why, to demand an explanation, but instead I swallowed my panic and did the only thing I could. I let him have the space he asked for. I poured myself a glass of wine, pulled out the stack of patient charts I needed to review, and tried to distract myself. But the gnawing unease wouldn't leave. Something about the message felt wrong. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I remembered the Ring doorbell we had installed at Liam's old apartment, the one he kept for convenience during early shifts. The small precaution after a previous neighborhood break-in. A thought crossed my mind. Just check the feed, make sure everything's normal, nothing more. And that's when I saw it. Timestamp 9:17 p.m., roughly 20 minutes earlier. A man, Noah Grant, Liam's ex-boyfriend, walking up the front porch carrying a bottle of wine and what looked like takeout bags from that fancy Thai place downtown. He approached the door with an ease that suggested familiarity. And then, the impossible happened. Liam opened the door. I rewound the video, watched it again, and again. Each time the scene carved itself deeper into my chest. My mind raced. How could this be? Liam, the man I trusted, the one I had shared 3 years of my life with, had invited another man, his ex, into our shared emotional space while telling me he needed space to focus on himself? I felt every emotion at once. Disbelief, confusion, rage, sorrow, betrayal. My heart pounded violently, my palms were clammy, and my chest felt tight, as if the air itself had been stolen. How had I been so blind? How could the man I loved be living a secret life, while I obediently gave him the space he demanded? And then the cruel clarity hit me. This wasn't just an emotional lapse. It was deliberate, calculated. He had framed this as self-care, a noble pursuit of personal growth, while secretly nurturing a connection with someone else. My trust, my patience, my empathy, they had been weaponized against me. I didn't call him, I didn't text him, I didn't storm over to confront him like I wanted to. Instead, I sat down, glass of wine in hand, shaking, trying to process the enormity of what I had discovered. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, it was in the meticulous way he had made it seem normal, reasonable, even necessary. He had made me complicit in my own deception by framing his choices as my responsibility to support him. That night, I lay awake in our shared bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of my own rapid breathing loud in my ears. Every memory, every tender moment we had shared replayed itself in a cruel montage. And yet, beneath the hurt, a spark of resolve began to glow. If he thought he could manipulate my trust, my love, my sense of reason, he had underestimated me. I might be shattered, confused, overwhelmed, but I was not defeated. I vowed then, in the quiet darkness, that I would face this with clarity, with strength, and with unwavering resolve. I would not be a pawn in his game. Little did I know, this revelation was only the beginning. The fallout would be messy, public, and emotionally devastating, but it would also become the crucible in which I would forge a new version of myself, unshaken by betrayal, unafraid to reclaim my life. The morning after I discovered Liam's secret, I woke up to a silence that felt heavier than any words. Our apartment, usually filled with the soft hum of shared life, coffee brewing, the occasional clatter of dishes, his low voice humming a tune, was just empty. And yet, it felt as if the space itself was mocking me. Every corner held the ghost of normalcy I thought we had. I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands trembling, staring out the window at the small backyard where we had planted tulips last spring. The vibrant blooms now seemed absurdly cheerful, a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside me. Questions battered my mind relentlessly. How long? How many lies? Was everything just a performance? For a long time, I did nothing. I tried to reason with myself, to find some way to make it make sense. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation I hadn't considered. My rational mind fought against the evidence in the videos, the drafts of emails, the carefully curated Instagram posts. But my intuition, my gut, refused to bend. This was no misunderstanding. This was intentional. I remembered the countless nights we had spent planning our future, the wedding invitations we had picked together, the apartment we had furnished as a shared space, the laughter and whispered dreams at 2 a.m., while Liam had been smiling at me, holding my hand, my trust, and my love. He had been plotting an entirely separate path. The realization was like ice sliding through my veins. I tried to call him. My fingers hovered over the phone, the urge to confront, to demand answers, to scream in frustration, overwhelming. But I stopped. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. If he expected me to break, to beg for clarity, he would be disappointed. Instead, I decided to observe, to understand fully what kind of man Liam truly was. Over the next few days, I quietly gathered evidence, piecing together the fragments of deception, the timestamps, the drafts of emails, the public posts that contradicted his self-care narrative. Each discovery was another sting, but also another brick in the foundation of clarity I was building. When I finally saw him, it was in the kitchen, as if nothing had changed. He smiled, trying to bridge the silence. I held his gaze for a moment, measuring, weighing every nuance, every subtle flicker of emotion. "Isabella," he began softly. I held up a hand. "Stop. Just stop. I know everything." The way his face paled, the almost imperceptible twitch of his jaw, told me more than any words could. And yet, he tried, as always, to rationalize, to minimize, to gaslight. "It's not what it looks like. You're overreacting. I needed space for myself." I laughed quietly, a bitter sound. "Space? Liam, the space you needed was for someone else. You didn't need time to focus on yourself. You needed time to plot your escape while keeping me as a safety net." He faltered. For a moment, I thought I might have broken through. But then the practiced calm returned, the mask of reason, the careful choice of words meant to confuse and placate. I realized then that confrontation alone would not bring justice. This was not about anger, not about drama. It was about reclaiming my life and my peace. I would not allow myself to be manipulated, and I would not allow his charm to rewrite the truth. I began taking concrete steps, canceling wedding plans, notifying vendors, quietly informing mutual friends of my decision to step back. Each action was a small reclaiming of autonomy, a way to assert that my life, my choices, and my dignity were non-negotiable. Emotionally, I vacillated between grief and fury. At times, the betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. At others, a quiet, burning indignation fueled a clarity I had never known. I began journaling every thought, every realization, every painful memory. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to disentangle myself from the web Liam had spun. I spoke to friends, carefully selecting those who would listen without judgment, without filtering my pain. Their support was a lifeline, and slowly I began to recognize a truth I had tried to deny. Liam had shown me who he was. The man I thought I knew, the partner I had trusted implicitly, had never truly existed in the way I had imagined. By the end of the week, I felt a shift. The shock had not left me, and the betrayal still burned, but beneath the pain, a quiet resolve had taken root. I would not be broken. I would not be passive. And most importantly, I would not allow someone else's duplicity to define my worth. In that crucible of confusion, heartbreak, and reflection, I realized something essential. Betrayal is not just about the act, it's about the choices you make after. And I was choosing clarity, dignity, and freedom. The days following my initial confrontation with Liam were a blur of phone calls, emails, and the quiet sting of reality setting in. I thought the hardest part would be facing him, but I was wrong. The real challenge was navigating the world around me. The friends, the family, the subtle judgments that carried just as much weight as the betrayal itself. It began with his mother. Elaine had always been warm, charming, the kind of woman whose approval I had quietly cherished. I had spent months trying to cultivate a relationship with her, inviting her to dinners, sharing small gifts, making the effort to bridge the gap between future daughter-in-law and trusted family confidant. But suddenly, I was a threat, a problem, a disruption to the carefully constructed life Liam wanted to maintain. "Isabella, honey," her voice dripped concern over the phone, "you're overreacting. Liam didn't mean to hurt you. You have to understand. He's been under so much pressure at work, and you know how stressful the hospital environment can be. Maybe you're just misreading things." I paused, the phone heavy in my hands. Misreading things? I had security footage, draft emails, Instagram posts. I could see the truth in pixels and text, yet here was his mother, subtly questioning my judgment, my memory, even my perception of reality. "Elaine," I said slowly, carefully, "I'm not misreading anything. I have evidence, proof that Liam has been prioritizing someone else while keeping me as a safety net. This isn't about pressure or stress. This is about honesty, which I trusted him to have." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, weighing loyalty to her son against the facts I had laid bare. Eventually, she sighed. I didn't realize it was this serious. I'll think about it." It was a weak concession, but it was something. A crack in the facade that had shielded Liam from consequences for so long. Then came the friends. Mutual friends who had long admired our perfect couple dynamic suddenly became messengers of judgment. Some were subtle, dropping offhand comments about how I was too sensitive or reading too much into a stressful situation. Others were more direct, asking why I hadn't tried harder to be understanding, why I had blocked him, why I wasn't giving him another chance. Each interaction was a small battle, every conversation a test of my resolve. I began to realize that the betrayal wasn't just between Liam and me. It had ripples that affected everyone around us. And if I let their opinions sway me, if I let their casual dismissal of my experience undermine my perspective, I risked losing not just Liam, but my own sense of self. Amid the social pressure, the evidence I had collected became a double-edged sword. It was a shield, protecting me from self-doubt, but it also made the world seem colder, more hostile. I could no longer rely on the comforting illusion that others would naturally side with truth and integrity. I had to stand alone, unwavering. The turning point came when I received word from a mutual friend that Liam had been sharing his version of events, portraying himself as a victim. According to him, I had been overreacting, invading his privacy, and misinterpreting innocent actions. His narrative painted me as irrational, emotional, and unstable, precisely the story he wanted people to believe. I felt the anger rise, a controlled but fiery current in my veins. This wasn't just betrayal, it was manipulation on multiple levels. He had not only deceived me, but he was also rewriting the narrative in real time, hoping to reshape perception to protect himself. The audacity of it stunned me, but it also strengthened my resolve. In response, I began to act methodically. I documented every interaction, every message, every piece of evidence I had gathered. I organized the emails, the Ring camera footage, the Instagram posts. Each file, each screenshot was a testament to my clarity, a record of the truth that could not be erased. I also took steps to protect myself emotionally. Therapy sessions, long walks, journaling, and moments of quiet reflection became essential. I realized that if I allowed myself to be consumed by anger alone, I risked losing sight of who I was and what I valued. The goal was not revenge, it was survival, dignity, and a reclaiming of my life. As the conflict escalated, Liam grew more desperate. He began texting, calling, even showing up at my workplace, all under the guise of wanting to talk things through. But I had learned that these gestures were not about reconciliation. They were about control. His presence was a reminder, a subtle attempt to destabilize me, to make me question my choices. I did not respond. I maintained my boundaries. I was firm, unyielding, and resolute. Every time he tried to weave a narrative that cast me as irrational or unreasonable, I reminded myself of the evidence, of the truth, of my own clarity. And slowly the world began to tilt back into balance. Friends who had initially doubted me began to see the truth in subtle ways, the inconsistencies in Liam's stories, the quiet hints that pointed to his duplicity. Even his family, initially defensive, could not ignore the weight of evidence. The escalation, chaotic and exhausting as it was, became the crucible in which my power grew. By the end of these weeks, I realized that the most dangerous battles were not the ones fought in public or with evidence. They were the ones fought inside, in the quiet spaces of my own mind. And in that struggle, I discovered something essential. Betrayal could shake me, anger could fuel me, but neither could define me. I was Isabella, I was strong, and I would emerge from this storm with clarity, purpose, and unshakable dignity. It was a Friday evening when the weight of everything finally pressed down on me like a physical force. I sat alone in our living room, the soft hum of the heater the only sound, staring at the faint glow of streetlights through the curtains. The apartment, once a sanctuary, felt alien now. Every book on the shelves, every photograph on the walls, every small token of shared life with Liam seemed to mock me. The illusion of us had been ripped away, leaving behind an emptiness that gnawed at my chest. I thought I had prepared myself. I had evidence, I had clarity, I had made decisions about boundaries and next steps, and yet the betrayal cut deeper than I imagined. It wasn't just that Liam had been dishonest. It was that he had been calculating, strategic, and utterly self-serving. He had woven a life in parallel, keeping me emotionally tethered while quietly orchestrating an exit strategy with his ex. The realization made my stomach turn, a cold, twisting knot that refused to loosen. I tried to sleep that night, curling into the sheets, but my mind raced. Memories of our laughter, our whispered dreams at 2 a.m., the excitement of planning a wedding, they came unbidden, each one a cruel reminder of how thoroughly I had been deceived. I could see him in my mind's eye, smiling at me, holding my hand, while simultaneously constructing a narrative that would serve his own ends. I felt naive, foolish, and heartbreakingly exposed. Even friends and family, those I thought would naturally support me, seemed to vacillate. Some offered half-hearted sympathy. Others gently implied that I might be overreacting, that I should forgive, that I should understand his perspective. The isolation was suffocating. I realized that betrayal doesn't just hurt. It can make you feel utterly alone, even when surrounded by people. I walked through the apartment, touching the furniture, the dishes, the framed photos. I remembered the evenings spent cooking together, the small, mundane moments that had felt so intimate, and now they were just ghosts, shadows of a life that no longer existed. The heartbreak wasn't loud. It was a quiet, relentless pressure that seeped into every thought, every breath. I wanted to cry, to scream, to throw something across the room in anger, but I didn't. Instead, I sat in silence, letting the grief wash over me in waves, overwhelming and unrelenting. I questioned myself constantly. Did I miss the signs? Was I too trusting? Could I have done something differently? Even as I acknowledged my own strength, I also felt the crushing weight of vulnerability. Betrayal has a way of making you doubt not just others, but yourself. The self-doubt clawed at me. I wondered if I was imagining patterns, if my judgment had failed me, but the evidence was undeniable, the truth glaring and inescapable. Liam's duplicity was real, and the world I had believed in had shattered. Sleep finally came in fitful bursts, punctuated by vivid dreams of confrontation, of shouting, of trying to reach him only to find him absent. I woke each time with a racing heart, a sense of despair pressing down as if the universe itself had conspired to remind me of my loneliness. By Sunday, the dark moment reached its peak. I walked along the lake near our apartment, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, my reflection in the water, a distorted, sorrowful version of myself. I realized I had been holding on to the idea of love, to the life we planned, to the man I thought I knew, and letting go felt impossible. Tears streamed freely, unrestrained. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of grief, betrayal, anger, sadness, disbelief. The world was a blur of shadows and light, reflections of a life I could no longer inhabit. I had no answers, only questions, and the crushing sense of being utterly alone in facing them. Yet even in that darkness, something flickered. Amid the pain, the grief, the betrayal, a seed of clarity began to emerge. I realized that hitting rock bottom was not the end. It was a turning point. If I could survive this, I could emerge stronger, more aware, and more determined to reclaim my life on my terms. For the first time, I acknowledged the truth of my situation without filter or excuse. Liam had chosen deception. He had prioritized his own desires over honesty, loyalty, and respect. And while I could feel the pain, I did not need to let it define me. I could grieve, I could feel anger, I could mourn the life I thought I had, but I did not have to surrender to it. As I walked back home, the chill in the air, a stark contrast to the warmth of my apartment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would rise from this. I would take back my power, my dignity, and my life. I would not let betrayal dictate my worth. And while the path ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not the end of my story. The next morning, the sunlight slanting through the blinds felt almost accusatory. It highlighted the small cracks in the apartment, the places where our shared life had left its imprint, and reminded me that nothing could go back to the way it was. For hours, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring at the stack of evidence I had collected over the past weeks. Each screenshot, each Ring camera clip, each draft email was a small key unlocking the truth. I had spent nights replaying events, dissecting conversations, trying to rationalize or soften the blow. But now, with the fog of raw emotion lifting slightly, I could see things clearly. Liam hadn't just been neglectful. He had actively constructed a dual life, manipulating my perception, my trust, my reality. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was meticulously documented, undeniable, irrefutable. Then came the breakthrough. While reviewing emails one more time, I stumbled upon something that crystallized everything: the chain of drafts between Madison and her ex, Noah. Every carefully worded message revealed intentions that had been hidden beneath the guise of self-care and personal growth. She wasn't just creating emotional distance, she was actively preparing a life without me, plotting a new chapter where I didn't exist. The feeling that washed over me was strange. Not just rage, not just heartbreak, but empowerment. For the first time, I realized that knowing the truth gave me a level of control Liam could never take away. Knowledge, I thought, is a kind of freedom. I decided to act, methodically, deliberately, without hysteria. First, I contacted the wedding venue, canceling our April reservation. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel was understanding, though the $8,000 deposit was non-refundable. It stung financially, yes, but compared to what I was sparing myself emotionally, it was a small price. Next, I reached out to the florist, the caterer, and the photographer, redirecting their services to other events and preserving what I could. Each action was a statement, a reclamation of agency. Then came the symbolic gesture. I purchased a dozen white lilies, flowers representing rebirth and closure, and left them on the doorstep of the apartment Liam had maintained as a work convenience. I placed a note alongside them. Since you need space to focus on yourself, here's the rest of your life to do it without me. Take care, Isabella. The act itself was strangely cathartic. It was both an ending and a declaration, a refusal to remain trapped in the narrative Liam had written for me. But the ultimate turning point came unexpectedly, through a conversation with Talia, Liam's longtime friend. We met at a quiet cafe in Fremont, a place where sunlight spilled lazily across the wooden tables. Talia looked weary, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but her voice carried conviction. Isabella, she said, leaning forward, I need to tell you the truth. Liam has been lying to all of us. All of us. Those stories about overreacting, invading his privacy. He's been spinning a narrative to protect himself while keeping you in place. I found out recently he's been seeing Noah for weeks, dating, and using you as a safety net. I felt the anger rise, hotter this time, steadier. There was no shock anymore, no confusion, only clarity. The evidence I had feared might be circumstantial suddenly aligned perfectly with the testimony of someone outside the immediate drama. This wasn't my imagination. This was reality, and reality was on my side. With that confirmation, everything shifted. The darkness of doubt, of second-guessing myself, evaporated. I recognized that Liam's deception had not diminished my worth or my judgment. It had merely exposed his character. I was free from his manipulations. Free to grieve, yes, but also free to act with precision and integrity. From that moment on, my actions became purposeful. I changed passwords, removed Liam from all shared accounts, and blocked him across every platform. I refused to respond to messages, calls, or attempts at explanation. I was no longer a passive participant in someone else's narrative. I was the author of my own. That evening, as I sat alone with a glass of wine and soft music playing in the background, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. Not the naive peace of denial, but a hard-earned, deliberate peace forged in the crucible of betrayal. I had faced the lies, confronted the manipulation, and emerged with clarity. I knew my worth, and I refused to let anyone, especially Liam, erode it again. The turning point wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing him the consequences of his actions or proving a point. It was about reclaiming my life, my time, my energy. Every small act of preparation, every boundary I set, every step I took toward self-preservation was an assertion of autonomy. And as I closed the laptop, put away the evidence, and walked to the window overlooking the city, I realized something profound. This was no longer a story about betrayal. It was a story about survival, strength, and the quiet power of reclaiming oneself. I was Isabella, unbroken, unshaken, and ready to move forward into a life that I could shape entirely on my own terms. The days following my turning point were surreal, a strange mix of calm and chaos. While I had taken control of my own life, the ripple effects of Liam's deception began to reach him. Friends, colleagues, and even family who had previously bought into his version of events were slowly seeing the cracks in the carefully constructed image he projected. It started quietly. Mutual friends who had defended him approached me cautiously, their eyes heavy with unease. "Isabella, we didn't realize," one whispered, her voice trembling. Another simply shook her head, murmuring apologies that felt both genuine and belated. The realization that I had been gaslighted slowly spread, and the social foundations Liam had relied on began to crumble. People who had once questioned my judgment were now questioning his. Then came the legal consequences. The vandalism of my car, a calculated act of retaliation, was no longer a private annoyance. The police investigation had confirmed what I already knew: the distinctive teal sneakers, the timing, the Ring camera footage, they all pointed to Liam. When the court date arrived, he faced the charges of malicious mischief, with irrefutable evidence stacked against him. $730 in restitution and a guilty plea later, and it was over. No dramatics, no excuses. The law had recognized the calculated cruelty, and justice, in a small but real way, had been served. It was almost anticlimactic in a sense. Liam's world had not collapsed in dramatic fashion. He hadn't faced social exile or public humiliation beyond the legal acknowledgement of his actions. But to me, it didn't matter. The damage he had inflicted on our relationship, on my trust, was already reversed in its emotional power. I had refused to let him dominate the narrative any longer. I had already moved on. Friends and colleagues who had doubted me before now sought to understand, to apologize, to reconnect. I accepted their gestures with grace, knowing full well that their shift in perception had little to do with me and everything to do with Liam's unraveling. I didn't need them to validate my experience. I only needed them to witness the truth. Meanwhile, Liam attempted, in small ways, to re-enter my life. Emails, texts from blocked numbers, even indirect messages through mutual acquaintances. Each time, I simply ignored them. The temptation to respond was fleeting, an echo of old habits, but the clarity I had gained in the turning point phase was stronger than any residual attachment. I had learned that engagement with a manipulator only gave them more ammunition, more space to distort reality. I refused to give him that power. I also took steps to reclaim the physical and emotional spaces that had been tied to our life together. The apartment, once a shrine to shared dreams, became my sanctuary again. I rearranged furniture, purged reminders of Liam, and replaced them with symbols of growth and rebirth. The engagement ring, the lingering traces of shared plans, were all removed and replaced with personal mementos that celebrated my own life, achievements, and ambitions. Every object in that space became a statement. This is mine, and I am the author of my own narrative. Through it all, I felt the transformation within myself. I moved from heartbreak to empowerment, from confusion to clarity. I began to explore passions I had neglected: reading, writing, even taking up a woodworking class that had always intrigued me. Nights once spent walking on eggshells were now spent in deliberate joy and self-discovery. I found peace in routine, pleasure in solitude, and excitement in the possibility of the life I could shape. Months later, I learned tidbits about Liam's new life. He had indeed moved on, starting a new job and a new relationship, but whispers of instability followed him. Mutual friends casually mentioned tensions, early conflicts, and eventual fallout with his new partner. I didn't relish hearing this. It wasn't about revenge, but I noted it quietly, a confirmation that the patterns I had recognized in our relationship were not isolated. Liam's choices reflected his character, not my failings. The true reward, however, was internal. I had faced deception and emerged intact, my sense of self sharpened, my understanding of boundaries reinforced. I no longer questioned my judgment or my ability to recognize character. The betrayal that had once seemed insurmountable became a mirror, reflecting not my weakness but his duplicity and my own resilience. The fallout extended beyond Liam. It rippled into social circles, family dynamics, and professional networks. People began to treat me differently, not with pity, but with respect. Not because I had sought validation, but because the truth was evident. I had endured, I had acted, and I had risen above the chaos that someone else had orchestrated. And through it all, I understood a profound truth. Fallout is not only about punishment or justice for others, it is about reclamation for yourself. Liam's misdeeds had consequences, yes, but my real triumph was in asserting agency, redefining my life, and refusing to allow betrayal to dictate my emotional landscape. By the time the legal matters concluded and the dust settled, I felt lighter than I had in months. The betrayal, the deceit, the manipulation, all were behind me. I had reclaimed my life and my power, not by seeking revenge, but by living with integrity, clarity, and unwavering self-respect. The fallout had been complete, but it had fallen entirely on the right person, those who had chosen deception over honesty. And I had emerged not broken, but stronger, clearer, and ready for the next chapter on my own terms. The first morning after the final closure felt surreal. No messages, no calls, no lingering uncertainty, just sunlight streaming across my living room, highlighting the small plants I had nurtured while rebuilding my life. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the silence, and for the first time in months, I felt entirely at peace. It wasn't a victory over Liam, not really. It was a victory over fear, over doubt, over the tendency to let someone else dictate my worth. I reflected on the months of deception, manipulation, and heartbreak. There had been anger, sadness, and moments when I questioned my own perception of reality. But there had also been clarity, resilience, and a gradual reclamation of my sense of self. I realized that true strength isn't about confrontation or revenge. It's about maintaining integrity, setting boundaries, and choosing yourself when others fail to honor you. The lessons were profound. First, trust your instincts. When something feels off, don't dismiss it in favor of convenience or hope. Second, boundaries are sacred. Giving someone space doesn't mean surrendering your life or your emotional well-being. And third, self-worth cannot be negotiated. Relationships should nurture and support, not manipulate or erode. I found joy again in the simple things. Cooking dinner without pretense, diving into a new book, taking long walks along the waterfront, and exploring passions I had set aside. The world seemed richer, brighter, more full of possibilities because I was no longer carrying the weight of someone else's duplicity. Months later, I met Renee, a literature professor, on a quiet Tuesday evening. Our connection was effortless, grounded in mutual respect and shared curiosity. With her, I could be myself without hesitation. There was no drama, no manipulation, just companionship, laughter, and genuine presence. It was a revelation. Love could feel calm, secure, and nourishing. As I placed the last memento from the past, a small brass globe engraved with my classroom coordinates, on my desk, I smiled. It was symbolic, yes, but also practical, a reminder that the world is unpredictable, life can be unfair, but when faced with betrayal or hardship, clarity, courage, and self-respect create space for renewal. Looking back, I understand now that the hardest endings can become the most liberating beginnings. By letting go of someone who didn't honor me, I found myself. By trusting my own judgment, I regained control of my life. And by embracing honesty, integrity, and self-love, I opened the door to the relationships and experiences I truly deserved. In the end, the best revenge was never about punishment. It was living fully, freely, and with intention. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill my lungs. For the first time, I was entirely present in my own story, and for the first time, it felt like my story was finally mine.